My name is Michael Turner, and for most of my life I carried two heavy burdens, my weight and my insecurities. By the time I reached 28, I was already a junior analyst at a mid-sized tech company in the city. From the outside, my job looked decent. I had a stable income, a cubicle with my nameplate, and I was slowly climbing the corporate ladder. But the truth was far less glamorous. Every day I walked into that building, I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong. I was the fat guy in the office. Everyone knew it, and I knew they knew it. My shirt stretched tightly across my stomach, the buttons barely holding together, and I could feel my colleagues' eyes flicking toward me whenever we all had to squeeze into the small break room. The guys in sales always looked so sharp, slim-fit suits, polished shoes, perfectly styled hair. They talked about their gym routines, their weekend runs, their new diets. I sat in the corner, sipping my coffee and pretending not to care, but inside, I hated myself for not being like them. At lunch, I always tried to make healthier choices, ordering salads when the team went out, but I could see the side glances. Sometimes they'd smirk, as if they were thinking, "Yeah, right, like a salad is going to fix that belly." And maybe they were right. For years, I'd fallen into a cycle of fast food, late-night snacking and excuses. My body was the evidence of every failure I'd chosen to ignore. Still, I believed one thing kept me afloat: my work. Numbers, reports, analysis, that was my world. I worked longer hours than anyone else. I volunteered for extra projects. I stayed late when everyone else went home. I thought if I just worked hard enough, someone would notice. Maybe, just maybe, people would respect me for my brain, even if they never respected me for my body. But my boss, Richard Collins, made sure that didn't happen. Richard was everything I wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, charismatic, always dressed in suits that looked like they were tailored just for him. He had this presence that sucked the air out of a room. When he walked into the office, people straightened up. When he cracked a joke, everyone laughed. He was the kind of man who knew how to make people feel small, and he enjoyed it. From the very beginning, I knew he didn't like me. Maybe it was my size. Maybe it was the way I sweated after rushing into meetings. Maybe it was just the fact that I wasn't polished like the others. But whatever the reason, Richard had a way of reminding me, with little comments, little smirks. Once, when I was out of breath after running up the stairs, he said, "Careful there, Michael. Don't want to call an ambulance just yet." People laughed. I tried to laugh along, but inside, it stung. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself to focus, work harder. One day, he'll notice the effort. That's what I believed, until the day of the meeting that changed everything. It was a Friday morning, one of those days when everyone gathered in the big conference room for updates. At least 30 people were there, maybe more. I'd been preparing for this for days, no, weeks. My presentation was about a new client retention strategy I had designed. I worked on every detail, every chart, every number. I rehearsed in front of my laptop until my voice was hoarse. I even ironed my shirt the night before, something I rarely did, just to look a little sharper. When my turn came, I stood up, clutching the clicker in my hand, palms sweaty. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the people next to me could hear it. "Good morning, everyone," I began, forcing a smile. "I'd like to present an analysis of our client retention strategy." I barely finished my first sentence before Richard cut me off. "Michael," he said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "why don't you take a deep breath before you pass out? We don't need you collapsing on us today." The room erupted in laughter. My throat went dry, my ears burned. I tried to push through, clearing my throat and clicking to the next slide, but Richard wasn't finished. As I began explaining the first graph, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Careful with those slides, Michael. Don't lean on the table too much, it might collapse under the pressure." More laughter, louder this time. People chuckled, covered their mouths, exchanged glances. Some looked at me with pity, which felt even worse than mockery. My face burned red, my voice shook, and the words on my notes blurred together. I stumbled through the rest of the presentation, barely making sense, just wanting it to be over. When I finally sat down, my hands were trembling. Richard gave a satisfied smirk, as if he'd accomplished exactly what he wanted, to remind me, in front of everyone, that I was a joke. After the meeting, people went back to their desks. A co-worker, Julia, gave me a quick pat on the shoulder and whispered, "Don't take it personally, he does that to everyone." But I knew that wasn't true. He didn't humiliate everyone. He targeted me, because I was the easiest target, the fat guy. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I stared at my reflection in the small mirror above the sink, and I hated what I saw. My shirt was wrinkled from sweat, my tie crooked, my eyes red. I whispered to myself, "Why do you let this happen? Why do you stand there like a fool while he destroys you?" For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. My mind replayed the laughter over and over again. Every email I typed came out with mistakes. Every time I tried to talk to someone, I stumbled. At one point, I caught Richard looking at me from across the room with that smug grin, and I wanted to disappear. When 5 o'clock finally came, I didn't head straight home. I went to the parking lot, sat in my car, and just sat there. The building behind me glowed with a few lights still on, but most of the windows were dark. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My chest felt heavy, like I couldn't breathe. "This can't be my life," I muttered. My voice cracked. For years, I had accepted being the fat guy, the background character, the punchline. Maybe I even believed that's all I deserved, but sitting in that car, humiliated, broken, I realized something. I couldn't keep living like this. I thought about quitting, about walking into Richard's office on Monday, throwing my badge on his desk and telling him to shove his job where the sun doesn't shine. But then another thought crept in, one that surprised me. If you quit now, he wins. If you walk away, you'll always be the joke in his story. But what if you didn't quit? What if you changed the story? The idea terrified me. Change? I'd tried diets before, tried gyms, tried to fix myself, and every time I failed. But something about that moment felt different. This wasn't just about losing weight anymore. It was about respect, self-respect, and one day, maybe, the respect of others. I whispered to myself, "Not anymore. You won't stay this way anymore." I didn't know how I was going to do it, and I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew one thing for sure. One day, Richard would see me again, and when he did, it wouldn't be as the fat guy he mocked in front of everyone. It would be as something more, as the man in charge. I didn't sleep much that weekend. The humiliation from Friday's meeting replayed in my head like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's smirk, heard the laughter, felt the sting of being everyone's joke. But somewhere in the middle of that endless cycle of shame, something shifted. The anger didn't fade. It grew, and with it, a determination I had never truly felt before. By Monday morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Richard define me anymore. I didn't know exactly how, but I was going to change. That evening, instead of driving home after work like I always did, I turned left instead of right and found myself in front of a gym. It wasn't a fancy place, just a 24-hour fitness center with big glass windows and a neon sign buzzing in the dark. I sat in the car for a long time, watching the people inside through the glass. Fit bodies running on treadmills, lifting weights, moving with confidence. People who belonged. And me? I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere near that place. I almost drove away, but then I remembered Richard's words, his laughter and the way the conference room echoed with it. My chest tightened. No, not this time. I forced myself out of the car and walked through the doors. The smell of rubber mats and sweat hit me instantly. Music thumped from the speakers. I froze at the front desk, suddenly self-conscious. The young woman behind the counter gave me a polite but distracted smile. "First time here?" she asked. Yeah, I mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. I want to sign up. She handed me a form, and I filled it out with shaky hands. The whole time, I felt like everyone was staring at me. Rationally, I knew they weren't. Most people were too busy with their own workouts, but my mind screamed otherwise. They see you. They're laughing at you. You don't belong here. I changed into gym clothes in the locker room, an old oversized t-shirt and shorts that barely fit. When I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I wanted to turn back. My stomach bulged out, my arms looked soft and shapeless, and my face was flushed before I even touched a weight. But I clenched my fists and whispered, "Not anymore." I walked out onto the gym floor and headed for the treadmill. It seemed like the safest place to start. I pressed a few buttons and began to jog slowly. Within 2 minutes, my chest was heaving. My legs felt like lead, and sweat poured down my face. People around me were running at double my speed, barely breaking a sweat, while I looked like I was about to collapse. Shame burned through me, but I refused to stop. I lasted 12 minutes before I stumbled off, gasping for air. I moved to the weight machines, fumbling with the settings. I loaded too much weight and couldn't even move the bar. A couple nearby snickered, and I quickly adjusted it to the lowest setting, cheeks burning. I did a few shaky reps, then gave up. By the end of the night, my body ached. My pride was in tatters, and I wondered if I was fooling myself. On my way out, I muttered, "Maybe this was a mistake." That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Tough first day?" I turned to see a man about my age, maybe a few years older, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. He was muscular, but not overly so, with a friendly face and kind eyes. "Yeah," I admitted, forcing a laugh. "I think I nearly died on that treadmill." He chuckled. "Don't worry. Everyone feels that way their first time. Name's David." "Michael," I said, shaking his hand. "Well, Michael," David continued, "you showed up. That's the hardest part. Most people never even make it through the door. You did." I wanted to argue, to tell him I looked ridiculous, that I didn't belong here, but his tone was so genuine, it stopped me. For the first time in years, someone wasn't mocking me or pitying me. They were encouraging me. "Thanks," I said quietly. David nodded. "I'll see you around. Stick with it." That night I drove home sore, exhausted, but strangely hopeful. The next few weeks were brutal. Every workout left me drenched in sweat, my muscles screaming. There were days I wanted to quit, days I almost didn't go. But every time I thought about giving up, Richard's voice echoed in my mind. That humiliation became fuel. David noticed me struggling one evening and started giving me pointers. He showed me proper form, explained how to set realistic goals, and even texted me sometimes to keep me accountable. Slowly, my body began to adapt. I wasn't sprinting or lifting heavy, but I was improving. I could jog 15 minutes without stopping. I could lift weights without looking like I was about to break in half. After about 6 weeks, I noticed something in the mirror. My face looked a little slimmer. My shirt fit just a little looser. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough to light a fire in me. At work, people started to notice too. Julia, the co-worker who'd tried to comfort me after the meeting, stopped by my desk one morning. "You look different," she said, tilting her head. "Different good or different bad?" I asked nervously. She smiled. "Good, healthier, happier even." Her words shocked me. Happier. I hadn't thought about it, but she was right. Even though I was sore all the time, even though I dragged myself out of bed before sunrise to hit the gym, I was happier. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control. Richard, of course, didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. He still barked orders, still smirked when I spoke, still treated me like I was beneath him. But I no longer shrank as much under his gaze. Something inside me was changing. One night after a particularly tough workout, I sat in my car again, drenched in sweat. I remembered the night I had sat in this same spot weeks ago, broken and humiliated. The difference now was staggering. I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." And I meant it. By the time 3 months had passed, I hardly recognized myself. The mornings were no longer a battle to get out of bed. I still groaned when my alarm went off at 5:30, but instead of rolling over, I pushed myself up, laced my shoes, and drove to the gym. It had become part of me, a rhythm that felt as natural as brushing my teeth. Every rep, every bead of sweat, every ounce of soreness, it all added up. My clothes fit differently. The belly that used to push against my shirt was shrinking. My face was sharper, my jawline returning. Even my posture had changed. I wasn't hiding anymore. The funny thing was, people noticed before I fully did. One morning at work, I was pouring coffee in the break room when Mark, one of my colleagues from accounting, walked in. He stopped mid-step, staring at me with wide eyes. "Michael?" he asked, as if unsure. "Yeah?" I answered, a little confused. "Man, you look different, like seriously different. Have you been working out?" I felt a flicker of pride, something I hadn't felt in ages. "Yeah, been hitting the gym pretty consistently." He grinned. "Well, it shows. Keep it up, man." I carried that compliment with me all day. It wasn't about vanity, it was about validation. Proof that the hours of struggle were paying off. Julia noticed too. One afternoon we were working late on a project together. As she leaned over my desk to review some numbers, she paused and looked at me closely. "You're glowing," she said suddenly. I blinked. "Glowing?" She laughed. "Yeah. I don't know how else to describe it. You look confident. It suits you." Her words hit me deeper than I expected. Confidence. That was something I never thought I'd have. But not everyone responded the same way. Richard, of course, couldn't stand it. The first time he made a jab at me after I'd lost some weight, I saw something in his eyes. Hesitation. He started with, "Careful, Michael. Don't overexert yourself with those spreadsheets." But the smirk didn't land the way it used to. I wasn't the same man who had sat silently humiliated in that meeting months ago. I met his eyes, calm and steady, and said, "Don't worry, Richard. I've got it handled." For a moment, just a flicker, his confidence cracked. He looked away. That small victory fueled me like nothing else. David, my gym mentor, had become a true friend by then. He wasn't just showing me how to lift weights. He was showing me how to carry myself. One evening, as we wiped down our equipment, he said, "You know, Michael, it's not just your body that's changing. It's your whole presence. People are going to start treating you differently." I frowned. "Is that a good thing?" "Depends on you," he said with a shrug. "You can use it to intimidate or you can use it to inspire. I think you're the second kind of guy." That conversation stuck with me. At work, opportunities started opening up. I wasn't just the quiet guy in the corner anymore. In meetings, when I spoke, people listened. I wasn't mumbling into my notes. I looked people in the eye, spoke clearly, and carried myself with a new energy. It wasn't long before upper management noticed. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson, the director above Richard, pulled me aside after a presentation. "Michael," he said, "that was excellent. Clear, concise, confident. I want to see more of that from you." I nodded, trying to keep my cool, but inside my chest was pounding. This was the first time anyone in authority had recognized me for more than just doing the bare minimum. Richard noticed too, and he didn't like it. He started nitpicking my work, interrupting me in meetings, trying to reassert his dominance. But something had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. When he tried to cut me off, I didn't shrink. I held my ground. One day, during a heated discussion about a client account, Richard tried to belittle me in front of everyone. "Michael," he sneered, "maybe stick to the basics. Leave the complex stuff to people who can handle it." The old me would have gone silent, cheeks burning, staring at the floor. But this time, I straightened my shoulders, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "With all due respect, Richard, I've already handled it. The report is in your inbox. If you take a moment to read it, you'll see the client's concerns are already resolved." The room went silent. All eyes shifted between us. Richard's smirk faltered, and for once he had nothing to say. Julia later whispered to me, "That was incredible." It wasn't about embarrassing him. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't powerless anymore. Outside of work, my transformation continued. I was shedding not just pounds, but layers of insecurity. I started dressing better, choosing clothes that actually fit instead of hiding under baggy shirts. I went to the barber more often, kept my beard trimmed. Small things, but they added up. I even started going out again, not parties like the ones I used to avoid, but dinners with friends, small social gatherings. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the odd one out. But the biggest shift wasn't physical, it was mental. One night after a grueling workout, I sat in the locker room staring at my reflection. My body was leaner, stronger, but more importantly, my eyes looked alive. I thought back to the man who had walked into the gym for the first time, terrified and broken. He was gone. I whispered to myself, "You're not that guy anymore." At work, whispers began spreading. People were talking about me. Not as the overweight, overlooked employee, but as someone with potential, someone who could lead. And deep down, a new thought began to form. Why not me? Why not aim higher than just surviving in this job? Why not prove, to Richard, to myself, to everyone, that I was capable of more? The idea scared me, but it also thrilled me. I didn't know then just how far it would go. But I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the man Richard could humiliate. This was only the beginning of something much bigger. The day everything truly changed started like any other. I walked into the office, coffee in hand, ready for another round of spreadsheets and meetings. But instead of being waved off or ignored, people greeted me. Smiles, nods, even handshakes. The shift had been gradual, almost imperceptible. But that morning I felt it clearly. Respect. Something I had never truly received in this building before. Later that week, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. My stomach flipped. Old fears crept back as I knocked on his door. Memories of being scolded, of being humiliated by Richard in meetings, of feeling worthless. It all threatened to surge back. "Come in, Michael," Thompson said warmly. I stepped inside, heart pounding. He gestured for me to sit. "Michael, I've been watching your work these past months. The growth you've shown, not just personally, but professionally, has been remarkable. You've turned projects around, inspired colleagues, and shown a level of leadership I can't ignore." I swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "We're restructuring some teams, and I'd like you to lead one of them." For a second, I was speechless. Lead? Me? The man who had once been the fat joke of the office. The man Richard used to tear apart in front of everyone. "Yes, sir," I finally managed, voice steady. The first time I sat at the head of that conference table, something inside me clicked. The man who had once been the butt of every joke was now directing conversations, guiding strategies, making decisions. My voice carried weight. I could feel it in the room. People were leaning in, taking notes, asking for my opinion. But Richard hated it. His disdain dripped from every word, every glare across the table. He crossed his arms in meetings, scowled when I presented ideas. But he couldn't stop it, because my ideas worked. Clients responded positively. Projects moved smoothly. My team respected me. One Friday afternoon, during a major client presentation, Richard attempted to hijack the meeting. He cut me off mid-sentence, contradicted me, and tried to dismiss my analysis. My old self would have shrunk back, cheeks burning, staring at the floor. But this wasn't the old me. I calmly clicked through slides, pulled up the data, and laid out the facts step by step. My voice was clear, steady, unwavering. The client leaned forward, nodding along. When I finished, there was no room for doubt. My strategy was solid, airtight. The client shook my hand, smiling. "That was outstanding, Michael. We're confident moving forward with your plan." I glanced at Richard. His face was pale, his jaw tight. For the first time, he was the one humiliated. After the meeting, Julia caught me in the hallway. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "Do you realize what you just did?" "What?" I asked. "You didn't just prove Richard wrong. You showed everyone you're the one leading now. Whether they've said it out loud or not, they see it. You're the leader in this room, Michael." Her words echoed in my mind for weeks. More promotions followed, more responsibilities. I was no longer just an employee. I was becoming a leader. I threw myself into it, applying the same discipline I'd learned in the gym. Late nights, early mornings, endless hours of planning and strategy. But I loved it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just existing, I was thriving. And slowly, the company itself began to shift. Projects were executed better, morale improved, my team felt motivated, inspired. They told me things like, "You actually listen to us," or "It feels good to be respected here." Those comments mattered more to me than any title or paycheck. Meanwhile, Richard was unraveling. His arrogance turned into bitterness, his sharp tongue into desperate jabs. The same employees who once laughed at his jokes now rolled their eyes behind his back. The man who had once towered over me now looked small. And then it happened. One Monday morning, the company announced that Richard was stepping down. No details, just a brief memo. Rumors swirled. Some said he was pushed out, others said he quit under pressure. I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. All I knew was that the man who once humiliated me in front of everyone was gone. Not long after, Mr. Thompson called me into his office again. "Michael," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this company needs strong leadership, someone who understands people, who can inspire them, who can push us forward. I believe that person is you." I blinked, my heart hammering. "Are you saying—" He smiled. "I want you to take over as CEO." I sat there, stunned. The room seemed to spin around me. The boy who had once hidden in oversized shirts, the man who had been laughed at, mocked, belittled, was now being asked to run the entire company. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder, with conviction, "Yes, I'll do it." The day I stepped into that corner office, the weight of it all hit me. I remembered sitting in that same building months ago, broken and humiliated. Now I was at the top. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone knew. Some congratulated me, some were stunned, but no one doubted I had earned it. Weeks later, fate threw me one last twist. I was grabbing coffee downtown when I saw him, Richard. He looked older, worn down. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped. When he saw me, his eyes widened, flicking from my suit to my leaner frame. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "I never thought—" I met his gaze, calm and steady. "People change," I said softly. He looked away, shame clouding his face. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the burning need to prove myself. I felt pity. He had spent his life tearing others down, while I had built myself up. That was the difference. Back at the office, I called a company-wide meeting. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of hundreds of employees, I felt a swell of emotion. "I want to share something personal," I began. "Not long ago, I was humiliated in this very building. I was overweight, insecure, afraid. I let others define me. I let their words break me." The room was silent, every eye locked on me. But I decided one day that enough was enough. I worked, I fought, I changed. Not just my body, but my mind, my spirit. And now I stand here. Not because I'm perfect, but because I refuse to give up. I scanned the room. I saw heads nodding, eyes glistening. My story was no longer just mine. If there's one thing I want you all to take from my journey, it's this. Don't let anyone else write your story for you. Don't let their laughter, their doubt, their cruelty decide who you are. You decide, you build, you fight, and when you fall, you get up again. Because if I can go from being the fat guy humiliated by his boss to standing here as CEO, then you can overcome whatever battle you're fighting too. The applause was thunderous, filling the auditorium, echoing in my chest like a heartbeat. As I walked back to my office, Julia caught up with me, tears in her eyes. "That was incredible," she said, grabbing my arm. I smiled, humbled. "It's just the truth." That night, sitting alone in my office, I looked out at the city skyline. The journey had been painful, brutal at times, but it had forged me into someone stronger, someone I never imagined I could be. And I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was proof that no matter how broken, how humiliated, how lost you feel, you can rise. So to anyone watching, anyone listening, don't give up. Don't let the cruelty of others define you. Your story isn't over yet. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own struggles and triumphs, I'd love for you to join me here. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's build a community where we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Because we all deserve respect, love, and the chance to become who we're meant to be. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply. The old me, the broken, overweight man sitting silently in the corner, was gone forever. And in his place stood someone who had finally taken control of his destiny. And I knew, without a doubt, that the best chapters of my story were still ahead.